Good evening. Hello there. I am Trudy and I'm here with It's About Time, and we are going to cover tonight the book of Genesis, chapters 25 through 26. So, we've heard the story of what came out of um, 24. So, now we're going to start off encasing around what happened to Abraham. And as we start in the first couple of verses, it starts off and it says, "And now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran and Jokshan and Median and Median and Ishbak and Shua. And Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the son of Dedan were Ashuriam and Letushim and Lumim, and the sons of Midian were Ephan and Epher and Hanak and Abidah and Eldad. Now that's a whole bunch of names, y'all. Whole bunch of names. Good evening, Sister Lynette and Pastor Say. Thank you for joining me. So what we have here is that all of these children were actually born of the lineage of Keturah. And so here what has happened is that uh, these births occurred after the death of Sarah. So Sarah, being Abraham's original wife, she actually has passed away. And so there was nothing wrong with Abraham actually, having another wife after the death of his original wife. Now, there's quite a few differences that we'll notice as we go forward in here on how Abraham actually addresses them, because what we can see is that here, Abraham, as we knew, he was up in age. We can see by what has taken place that there was no infertility issues with Abraham at all. Because even after the fact, as Sarah and Abraham struggled to have their child, but we see now that Abraham has been fruitful and multiplied. And so he has plenty other children at this point. And they actually fathered 6 sons together. Good evening, Sister Kathy. Thank you for joining. And we've gone through all of their names. So now we see that we have another line of lineage that's actually set up at this point because of the children that she had with Qatar. So we have him having a child with Sarah, a child with Hagar, and now with Keturah. Okay? So now we're going to go on a little further into the 5th. And it says, "Now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But the sons of the concubines Abraham gives gifts while he was still living, and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east." Now, when we look at that, that's a bit much, because you go like, you have all these children, but yet you made a difference in between your children, because um, you gave everything to Isaac. And what we know here is that he refers to the children, they were the sons of concubine. Now, this lets us know how Abraham was actually looking, because Keturah was his wife. She was not a concubine. Hagar was a concubine, but Keturah was actually his wife. But it lets us know that how the first wife, Sarah, was still esteemed even though she was gone away, because you see here these kids were classified according to the word as sons of concubine. So, which was actually very interesting. So, and it has to do with more so with the covenant that God made with Abraham and Sarah. So this is kind of why it's said that way, but it's just interesting in reading, trying to figure out, well, you married her legally, so how could her kid to be called concubine. But that's basically the reason. So then we move on, and it says, in these years and all these years of Abraham's life, that he lived 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last breath and died in a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. So we see that God fulfilled his promise with Abraham, and he would have long life, and that he would make him the fathers of nations. So he's passing on the scene. But one good thing that I was in the studying, a statistic that came out, is that Abraham is probably the one of the most mentioned men in the Bible. He actually was mentioned over 70 times, and the only other person that was mentioned more than him was Moses, and Moses was actually mentioned 80 times. So I thought it was just an interesting tidbit, because we all learn together, and it's always good to know a little extra about things. And so, him living 175 years is a remarkable amount of years. But above all, it is part of the promise of God, and that God keeps his promises. So that's what we're seeing at this point. And Abraham was a great man. He was actually a very great man. And what God did was pass on his commitment or his covenant from one generation to the next, because the promise was that he would make him father of many nations. So he elongated his life so that he could actually start doing these things. And as we continue to go on, we'll start to see more about the descendants of Abraham. Then when we go down, it says, now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael. Okay. Now Ishmael, we know, is the son of Hagar. Okay. So he was considered the son of a concubine. Backstory: Sarah was trying to make sure that Abraham had a seed. She asked Hagar or sent Hagar to go sleep with Abraham, had a baby, and this is the end result. But he never was able to take the stance of the firstborn, because they just didn't recognize that way. So he was always referred to as the son of a concubine. Okay, so now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn to Ishmael, Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadad, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedishma. These were all the children that were born. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribe. So all of the children that he had, they all were established in their own territory, because he says they were all named prince in their particular tribe. So we see that there had to be some distribution with the gifts that were going on that Abraham had divided, that Ishmael was actually able to pass on to his own children. So that was the genealogy of Ishmael. And Ishmael actually lived for 137 years before he actually died. So we see we have that longevity and long life right there. Okay. So then when we go on, we'll go down to 19, and it says, now these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. So we see now Isaac is 40 years old before he has his first child. and he has it with the love of his life. If you kind of know the story about that, he loved her, loved Rebecca. So then he goes on, but the children struggled together within her. No, wait. And Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together in her, and she said, "If it is so, why then am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people shall be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So in her pregnancy, she was happy to be pregnant, but she didn't understand why was she struggling with this pregnancy, because they had an old legend that said that every time that she got around an idol, um, Esau would actually act up, and then every time that she got closer to something else, that one of the other babies would act up, and that's kind of like a legend that they said about it. But anyway, she was having a terrible pregnancy. There was always this disturbance within her womb, and so she asked the Lord, like, what is going on with this? You gave me the ability to have these children. Now why am I having so much trouble with them? Why what's really going on? Because if you've been barren and then you actually get the ability to have a child, you expect for it to be a very pleasurable time because you've waited so long for this. But now she's through all this turmoil, and it was interesting for her. And then when it tells them that there's two nations in her womb, it's talking about two different type of people, two different type of concepts or beliefs that are actually growing inside of her. And the older will serve the younger. Now, we all know that generally it's the oldest child that has all of the authority. Everything is passed on to them and not the reverse. But we see here with this particular pregnancy that's going on with her, everything seems to be backwards. Everything, it's just not logical for the younger person to rule over the older person. So this is what's actually going on in her body at this point. But God has actually kind of told her a little bit about what is going on. Then it goes on to say, now the first came forth red all over, like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. And afterward, his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So he called him the name Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when he gave birth to them. Now, that's some longevity for you. That's some old parents. I said, thank you, Jesus. That's a lot of years. That's a lot of years to be waiting. But then when we start to go back and look at the context of this actual scripture, we talk about Esau, and Esau, um, he was referred to or given that particular name because he was hairy. He was just red hair color. So I guess you would call him maybe like a ginger. So that's how he was born. And then the interesting thing was that when he was born, Jacob was holding on to his heel, and calling him a heel catcher meant that he was the idea of being a trickster, because they called Jacob a trickster, a con man, a scoundrel, a rascal. It wasn't a compliment to be called that name because of the connotation that was actually connected to it. Then they go on and it says, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Now, Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for the game, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, it goes back to and refer to how parents sometimes have favorites among their children for different reasons. And this is what is outstanding right here that they're actually talking about. And when Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field and was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of the red stuff there, for I am famished. Therefore his name was called Edom. So here we start to talk about now brothers not truly being kind to one another. And it's kind of like what strangers will do with you, that I'll give you this if you give me that. Instead of, brother, I know you're tired. Come on in. I've made something. Here's something to eat. So we start to see where the conflict starts to come in with them. And then so when he came in, he said, but Jacob first said, first sell me your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am about to die. So what use then is this birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Then Esau despised his birthright. Well, it was very, like I said, Jacob, very con man. He found his brother at his lowest point, where hunger was actually, affecting his judgment. And then he told him that if you want it, this is what you're going to have to give me. And he's thinking, like, what can I do with it right now? I'm starving. Why don't you? Okay, whatever. Here you go. And in all of that, the funny thing was that he sold his birthright, but it was an illegal transaction between the two of them, because neither one of them had the right to sell or overtake the other one. But being that he had given his word, or thought he did, this started a great war between these brothers, because Esau ended up leaving and was fairly upset about that he had traded off this birthright, meaning his entitlement or his inheritance, for just a bowl of stew. So that basically happened for 25. Now we're over to 26. 26 says, now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. Okay, so now we remember back before, there was a famine that happened between chapters 19 and 20, where we start to see it in Genesis. So Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now, this was a different type of Abimelech. This time, Abimelech is a title. It's not the actual personal name of anybody. Before, with Abraham, it was the personal name. But now this is actually a title. Okay. So then he has, and the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in that land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. So when we have Isaac, because of what's going on and a famine, when you can't feed, or you can't feed your flock, you can't feed your family, you will move. You will actually make a movement so that you can actually have provisions to actually feed and water and just make sure that you can preserve life. So this is what we found here. And it was the same thing that happened to his father. So as he's going through, we see that what's happening is Isaac is repeating almost the same identical mistakes as Abraham did, almost verbatim. The same things happening. Then we go on and says, then the Lord appeared to him and said, no, we already did. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So here again, that God is reassuring Isaac that he will give him the same provisions because of the covenant that he actually made with Abraham. So he's telling him, just the same way, I will make you, where you talk about all of your descendants multiply as the stars in heaven. This is some of the same things or verbiage that Abraham was actually told about. So he's telling him, trust me, trust me. And what happens oftentimes is that when we get outside of God's will and we try to fix things without seeking him, that we can make situations worse for ourselves. But the formal repetition of the covenant included three essential facts in the communication, and they were repeated afterward, including the promise of a land, meaning all these lands, a nation, meaning your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven, a blessing, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So this is the same exact thing that was repeated. So then we have, and I will multiply your descendants. And because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, so Isaac lived in Gerar. So because of the covenant that's made, now that's one thing that we have to remember. If we have a covenant with God, we have a God of covenant. It does not matter how long that it takes for it to come to fruition, that if God is in covenant with you, that you can be assured that it would come, because we're looking at what's going on. We talked about how old um, Abraham was when he passed away. You know, we talked about how old Ishmael was. The no matter, time has no measurement against the ability and the will of God, that he will bring everything that he said to come to pass. We just have to trust him and be patient and learn patience to be able to wait. And he will allow us to see it, because you can see that he allowed Abraham to live full days, long days. So he was able to see um, what God had actually promised to him. When the men of the place asked about his wife, now remember, here we go again. He said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say, my wife, thinking the men of the place might kill him on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. Now, didn't that happen again over in, was it 20, where Abraham did the same thing with Sarah? We were talking about Sarah was 90 years old, and she was a good looking woman at 90 years old. And he told the lie to say, this was my sister. Now we have Isaac repeating the same exact thing for the same exact reasons. So, and it came about when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through a window and saw and beheld Isaac was caressing his wife Rebekah. So then Abimelech called to Isaac and said, behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say, she is my sister? And Isaac said to him, because I said, lest I die on account of her. Now, isn't that the same thing that Abraham did before? But what we talked about before is that they believed in the covenant, that whomever is your wife, that's who betrothed, that's who assigned to you, that you cannot take another man's assignment, or we were saying the nakedness of your person is assigned to that person. So this would bring kind of damnation to them, because they would be going against the code. And Abimelech is basically angry at this point. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? This is the same thing that we found before, the same exact mistakes. One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech charged all the people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Almost verbatim what happened with Abraham. Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in that land the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. So we had the same exact thing where the first king actually gave Abraham, uh, you might as well say, booty to basically move through and have things to establish them, where he gave sheep and different things like that. That's when you talk about what he was given to actually move through and to make sure that he was taken care of. Because one thing about it is that these men did not want trouble, because one of the things that we'll see later on is that they realized that the hand of God was with them. Even though they might not have known much about it, but they knew that there was something greater than that actually was giving grace upon them. Okay, so then it says, for he had possessions of flocks and herds and great households, that so that the Philistines envied him. So we see that he started to flourish. He had servants, he had animals, and we always talked about, you always measure someone's wealth by how many cattle, children, or things like that. How did they have? So what are you showing me? So here it caused some contention between the Philistines, because they're just like, okay, like, what's going on with this? How's this happening? You're coming over to our place, but then you're flourishing more than we are. So it started to cause a little disruption. And then it says, then Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are too powerful for us. And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So he got there and he got bigger than what they expected him to do. Instead of just going and living just a normal life, because of the covenant that God had established with his father, that you can see that he started to reap the harvest of these things. Everything that God promised, he started to fulfill, and Isaac actually benefited from these things. So then we go on to 18. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham, and he gave them the same names which his father had given them. Now, the important thing about here is that when the Philistines actually fill the holes in, during that time, water was very important, because how else could you actually uh, provide water? Every human needs water. You have to have water. You may be able to go without food, but you have to have water. So it was an essential. It was like having gold. And here they had actually stopped up these things so that if you came through to actually water your cattle or your sheep or things like that, they couldn't be. And so what they were doing in essence was actually cutting off their wealth. So if the sheep or the cattle can't drink, eventually they'll die off. So that cuts away at his wealth. So this was their ultimate plan of what they had thought about doing by the means of the well. So you have to know how important that these wells were, and because they were actually there to sustain. They were sustainers. So he says, but when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there was a well of flowing water. Now, the difference here, which was such a great find, because the other waters, what happens is that um, it could become stagnant, it could become diseased because of how the containment was. But whenever you have running water, it's continually breaking off um, impurities and things like that. This is what we call running water, would be considered living water. And that's how they talk about the word, that the word continues to strip away all of the negativity, the dirt, the particles, and things like that, because the word in itself will cause you to be cleaned up. So this is what they found: running water, living water. And then he went on and said, The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Isaac, saying, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well and quarreled over it too, and they named it Sitnah. And he moved away from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he named it Rehoboth. Now, when we talk about the wells, um, one of the things that I found, it says the first well was named Contention because of everything that was going on there. It was contention because it made others jealous. Then the next well, which was called Sitnah, Sitnah was named Opposition for the same reason. But when they got to the third well, Rehoboth, actually was named because of roominess, because of the water that they found, because it was far enough to not be a problem. Isaac saw this was a testimony of God's faithfulness and blessing. So we see here again, God consistently is with us no matter what the situations that we face, that He will make us victorious. He will make us victorious. Then he goes on and he says, at the last, at last, the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the Lord, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants. Now, this is one time that we're noticing right now that Isaac had not had the encounters that Abraham had, because he's saying at this point that the Lord appeared to him and he had to calm him down. Told him, don't be afraid. So that lets you know that he was not used to having visitations like this, whereas Abraham was. But here we have Isaac was not. He says, for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he is always referring back to that covenant that he made. Abraham was obedient to God. Was he perfect? Absolutely not. But he was obedient to his call, the covenant that was made between he and God. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Then Abimelech came to him from Gerar, and his advisor Ahuzath and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to him, why have you come to me, since you hate me and you have sent me away? And they said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, even between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. Now, isn't that the same thing that happened with Abraham and a King Abimelech back then? Once again, they could see that God was with them. And that's how our lives should be. That when people see that even though they try to take us and put us in different trick bags and make us act outside of our character, that when we stand in the way of Christ, that we hold fast to the covenants and the commitments, that He will fight our battles, He will make our enemies our footstools. Here's a prime example of exactly what will happen. That He did the same exact thing that He did for His father, that He did for him. But the difference is that you have to hold fast. It is very easy to get sucked in. He could have tried to start a war with the other herdsmen, and things like that would have escalated into other things. But sometimes we have to sit back, let God be God. Because if He promised you it, you can be assured that it shall be. Then it says that that you will do us no harm, and we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good. and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. Then he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they arose early and exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. Now it came about on the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." So he called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba. And to this day, this is actually a name of the city. And when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Bashma, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Now, the reason that they brought grief to them was that they were supposed to stay married in their race. And what happened was Esau took off and he married someone that was not of the same race that he was. And it caused a problem because of the point that they were keeping the bloodline a certain way. And so, we go back now and we look at what happened with Esau, and we think about, all the problems that Rebecca had when she was pregnant with him. And why did God say that the younger would rule the older? Well, as we start to see the life of Esau was a fornicator. He was a profane person. He was a rough one. He's a rough one. He was a total roughneck. And so when he thought about it, it's just like you were told not to mix the races, not to marry women of Canaan. And this is exactly what Esau did. And so it caused some contention and grief to his parents. It was like shame to his parents, because instead of keeping the bloodline pure and going forth, now we've had this mixture. Okay. So that has been 25 and 26. So I hope you've gotten something out of it, that you, if not, remember that we all can find the water. We can find the living water. All we have to do is dive into his word, and that there may be wells in our lives that may close up, but there is the living water, that all we have to do is search for it, and we can proclaim that we have found water. Amen. So thank you for joining us. Make sure that you're here tomorrow again at 6 o'clock, where it's about time, where we're going through the Bible chronologically, where it makes it easier for us to understand the whole story, that this beautiful story that's being told, so that we can all grasp and hold on to it. So God bless you all, and that we will see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Bye.